that. So as I read these cards, and as you, if you have a card, you can hold it up, and Maka will come around the basket. I have a few left over from 9 o'clock service and also from last month, and I can begin with these. And I just want you to know that all of these warrant probably a longer, more in-depth response, but in order to get to some of these, I'll try to be as concise and go as quickly as I can. Also, it's not that I'm a treasure trove or an encyclopedia of Buddhist teachings, but I would share from my own experience in dealing with some of these as they come up. But again, the importance is the opportunity to share what's alive for the sangha out loud for everyone to hear. I don't tell your names, and if I cannot answer one of these, there is a spot there for an email, and I would consult my own teachers and my own research to see if I could get an answer for you to some of these questions. So the first card that I have here is, how do I deal with people with dense egos without being sucked in? And so what comes up for me in this question, how do I deal with people with dense egos without being sucked in? I think the first thing that comes up for me in this is probably the word deal. How do we deal with people with dense egos? And so the first thing is dealing. That's a lot of doing. That's a lot of efforting and work on your part. If you're familiar with the works of Ken Wilber, who talks about spiral dynamics, at any one time on this planet right now, they're discovering more, but there are currently 8 levels of consciousness. And I'm not going to get deep into spiral dynamics, but what that did for me when I learned about spiral dynamics was it helped bring about some understanding that there are basically 8 levels of consciousness, 8 levels or areas of people struggling with awakening. Eckhart Tolle talks about there comes a point in our practice when we learn to look upon the antics of the mind as we would the antics of an 8-year-old child. Spiral dynamics asks us to transcend and include. So in the same way that you would not deal with a 4th grader when you're a 7th grader, or if you're in college and you would not deal with a 10th grader, and so forth and so on, we transcend and include. What arises is compassion, not a doing, not a dealing. So in a situation where there is unskillful speech or unskillful behavior, obviously, the human part is there's going to be reaction. You're probably going to have some sort of a reaction. But in our practice, we move to drive a wedge of awareness into that reaction so that you're not simply meeting fear with fear or anger with anger, frustration with frustration. Instead, we take a moment, we breathe, we sense, we notice what comes up for you. And we purify that. We allow and we release. If it's really heavy, it's something you might want to deal with on the cushion later. And in that moment, allow compassion to arise without needing to deal or do anything. Sometimes silence and presence is the most powerful tool in dealing with a situation. And the other part of this question, without being sucked in, well, that's fear. So that's our practice. We work with, on the cushion, noticing fear, noticing anger, frustration, delusion, when these arise. In fact, I noticed this week, how does fear manifest in this form? Well, it manifests in the form, many ways actually. It manifests in procrastination. I put things off because I'm afraid. There's some aspect of me that's afraid of it. I noticed that this week. I also noticed busyness. Fear manifests in a busyness. I get really busy. And then when I stop and notice that I've been getting busy, I go to the cushion, and what's underneath that busyness is a fear of getting still because something is wanting to arise. This is such a beautiful and natural practice that we have. Any problems that we have are because of resistance to the way things are. If I get still, the body will naturally allow this fear to arise into my consciousness so that I can purify it, so that I can work with it. So there is a fear of getting sucked in here. That's on you. That's your practice. That's your path to work with. And as far as with other people, allow your presence to do the work. You don't need to do or deal at all. Thank you, Maka. Okay, so this next question is a question about, it says, discuss finding balance in non-attachment and working against living with injustice. Discuss finding balance in non-attachment and working against living with injustice. Interestingly, can you hear the attachment in the question? There's an attachment to justice. Finding balance in non-attachment and working against living with injustice. So there's already, for me, what comes up in this question, there's already a resistance to injustice, that it's bad, that it's wrong, that it shouldn't be here. Remember, the very definition of suffering is the mind wanting things to be different than the way they are. So first, what comes up here is noticing the attachment to justice. When you see that and you work with that and you purify that, in that way you are more able to hold with an open hand the arising and falling of each experience, of each phenomena, of each encounter that comes your way. This encounter is pleasant. This encounter makes me feel sad. It's very unpleasant. This encounter is neutral. I don't seem to have a feeling one way or another. And this is the feeling nature of every experience that will come your way. It's either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So there's the balance that I think is in the spirit of the question. It's that radical acceptance. It's that complete and total allowing of each moment to rise and fall. And this moment brings sadness, and we feel the sadness. But the moment you feel like the sadness shouldn't be there, or you want to blame somebody for making you feel sad, you are now lost in attachment and ego and suffering. If it's sadness, feel sadness. If it's frustration, feel frustration. If the body wants to express it through weeping, through isolating and simply spending time alone, whatever it is that the body is wanting to do with an experience, allow that. It's natural, it's normal, but we think our mind gets involved and sets up a whole criteria of conditions around should, shouldn't, resistance, can't be happening. All these things only make it more painful, make it more difficult. It adds the aspect of suffering on top of pain. Pain is natural. Suffering is optional. My mind feels plagued with negative thoughts and worrying about worst-case scenarios. Despite years of meditation practice, do you have any suggestions on ways to help this? I think it could be PTSD from past traumas. Okay, so this is there's a couple of things in this question that arise for me. The mind feels plagued with negative thoughts and worrying about worst-case scenarios. Worrying, as we know, is an abuse of imagination. We have powerful imaginations. And when we express these in art and music and poetry, then there is rejoicing. But when the imagination gets cut loose on the darker aspects and begins worrying and creating videos and worst-case scenarios, this is where our meditation and mindfulness practice can help us, because we then get to see the nature of mind. It's what it does. But do you see inside of that is that little subtle, oh God, there's something wrong with me. Right there's resistance. Right there, you're caught up in it. And so my invitation is to practice awareness and curiosity and be, oh, look what the mind's doing, not you. It's the mind, it's the result of cells doing work. The mind is having little electrical, the brain is actually having little electrical impulses. We call them thoughts, but they're actually the process and the result of cells doing work. So to become aware of the nature of mind and seeing and being the observer and seeing that that's not me. I have a body, but I'm not my body. I have feelings and I have emotions, but I'm not my feelings and emotions. And I have thoughts, but I am not my thoughts. I am the awareness of this phenomena as it rises and falls. So, to the spirit of the question, my mind feels plagued. Notice the term plagued as a resistance term, with negative thoughts and worrying. So, as you become aware of that, create space and allow the mind to just do these. The more we resist those thoughts, the more difficult it becomes. Do you have any suggestions on ways to help with this? I think it could be PTSD. And I would always invite someone to visit with a therapist, a trained counselor, a professional who has many techniques for working with PTSD. I mean, the spiritual path is a path of curiosity and self-inquiry. When we get stuck mentally, we have professionals that are there to help us. When we get stuck emotionally, we have friends, sangha, kalyana mitta, who can sit with us and hold us in space as we process and purify heavy emotions. And when we get stuck spiritually, we have teachers who can help provide a perspective on different things. So I invite you to explore in a curious, playful nature all of these avenues. The ones that are working will resonate for you. So yes, your suspicion of PTSD might warrant a visit to a therapist. A Buddhist perspective on an ex-spouse who came from an alcoholic family and a child from that marriage who has chosen to be estranged from you. So I imagine the child is living with the ex-spouse from your spouse. What comes up for me in this is that we cannot know another person's path. One soul rejoices in the experience of homelessness as another soul rejoices in the experience of providing blankets and food. Eckhart Tolle is very clear on this, that we draw to us every experience we need for our soul's awakening. The experience itself is the teacher. So to the degree that one feels abandonment or this sadness around another person that is not wanting to spend time or be in your presence, to that degree of abandonment or being left out, that's the practice right there. That's what we follow in. And when we purify that fear of being abandoned or that sadness around someone else not wanting to be with us, we purify that, and then compassion arises for what these other beings are going through, but they are going through what they have to go through. And we know that because they're going through it. The moment you want to make them go through something else, or you feel that this situation should be different than it is, you are now in resistance. You are now in ego. You are now no longer being present with the way things truly are, purifying what that brings up in you, and then from a place of compassion can move to a more compassionate place of action. So it's interesting that this person is estranged from you. If you have reached out through social media, through letters, through phone calls, or things like that, and simply have gotten no response, that's not a request to stop contacting me. However, it can be interpreted that way. If we are caught up in our own sadness and our own feelings of abandonment, then we will interpret things a certain way. If that other being has asked you to not contact them, then that is cut and dried. But if they have simply not responded, then that's different. And does not prevent you from sending cards, does not prevent you from reaching out through social media, sending letters. And you can continue to do that. It's funny because what comes up for me is I'm reminded of Ebenezer Scrooge and A Christmas Carol. And Ebenezer was doing a good job of isolating himself from everybody, but he had a nephew. A son from his sister had a son, and she had died. And the nephew was relentless and always stopping in, saying hi, sending cards, inviting Ebenezer, and he... But I so appreciated the nephew who maintained healthy boundaries and did not interpret that as pushing away. He simply, that's just Ebenezer. And there was such a joy in accepting him radically and fully as he is, without wanting him to be a different way.